Hey guys, this is my All Dungeons speedrun in 3718. So All Dungeons is a category that's gone through a lot of changes recently. There have been a lot of new glitches that completely change how the run goes, and it's way faster than what it used to be. And a lot of these glitches are pretty complicated, so I wanted to do this commentary to kind of explain what's going on. So the All Dungeons definition is beating all of the bosses, stepping into the blue warps at the end of the dungeon, and receiving the medallion from the blue warp. This run takes that definition to the extreme and does the absolute bare minimum to meet those requirements. And so the glitch that helps this run become so broken is stale reference manipulation, or SRM for short. It's a huge glitch that's been changing a lot of OOT speedrunning in the last few months. And I'll go over it more in detail later on. But the short version of it is that you can change certain data using Link's movement while grabbing something. And so this glitch is super powerful. It's so powerful that it even allowed for arbitrary code execution, which is where you can write and execute your own code while in the game. And that's obviously like ridiculously powerful. And because of that, it's banned in all main leaderboard categories aside from any percent, because any percent is just always no restrictions. So arbitrary code execution is not allowed in anything else. But SRM alone without arbitrary code execution is still super powerful. And we can do a lot of crazy things that will be done in this run with it. And SRM on its own is still super powerful. So much so that a lot of people do think it's like almost too broken that we shouldn't allow it in speedruns. But what we actually do is we split categories that allow it into two separate subcategories, one that allows it and one that doesn't. And All Dungeons is one of the categories that's split. So All Dungeons has an allowed SRM allowed version and an SRM banned version, and this is obviously the allowed category. So if some of the stuff you see in this run does seem too broken, that's why we have separate categories for it. So this run is done on the 1.2 Wii VC Japanese version. So SRM itself works on any version, but certain applications of it can be version specific because this glitch heavily relies on memory addresses and exactly where memory addresses are in memory. And certain versions it's easier to have a setup or even possible at all to have certain memory addresses line up in the correct way, and memory addresses are just a little bit different between versions. So some versions you just can't do certain applications of it, and for what we want to do in this run, 1.2 is the best. And this is also in Japanese. Typically Japanese is just used for faster text in this game. For the most part there's no glitches different at all in the Japanese version compared to the English version. They're completely identical, but this run actually does rely on Japanese text. If you saw at the beginning, I had a very strange file name. That file name is actually important to the run, and it does need Japanese characters, so this actually does require the Japanese version. So now getting started with the run, the beginning of the run looks pretty simple. It's just collecting rupees to get the sword and shield, but it's going to be a bit different from most other OOT speedruns. There's going to be certain rupees that you would typically see other speedruns get that I wouldn't be getting in this run. So normally you just need to get the sword, 40 rupees, and then get the shield. This run needs to get the sword and shield, and actually 55 rupees, because I also need to buy Deku Nuts in the shop. But also, one thing I have to do while collecting these rupees is I have to not collect a few specific rupees. So the way the SRM is going to work, which comes up fairly quickly after getting the shield, is that things in Kakiri Forest have to be loaded in just the right way, and things have to line up just the right way in memory. And in order to do that, certain rupees actually have to be skipped. I actually skipped one rupee near the crawl space. There's a rupee that you can get from cutting one of the signs in that maze there. And there's a rupee on top of the bridge, and a rupee behind Mito's house. All those rupees I have to specifically not get in order for memory to line up in the right way when I do the first application of stale reference manipulation in a few minutes. So that's why this rupee route looks kind of weird, like going in Mito's house and grabbing rupees from the chest and going over these stones multiple times for that rupee, and even going over these stones for this rupee here. That's the purpose of this very strange rupee route, is that certain rupees just can't be gotten. It's weird because this route requires more rupees than usual and you have less options for the rupees, which kind of makes it annoying. But that's all to get the shield. And also the deck of nuts. So this is where the setup for SRM is about to start. So the way SRM works is by grabbing something and moving it around, you're changing certain data about the object, mainly its position and angle. And for this we only care about the angle. So the angle of the object is some certain memory address that's being modified based on Link's angle. And if you can have something else load in its place while Link is still changing that angle, then you'll be modifying something completely different, and that's what SRM is. So to start, we have to get what we want to pick up in a very specific location in memory. And that's what all this moving back and forth is here. This is all setting up stuff in memory to be loaded in just the right way, so that a certain rock we want to pick up later is going to be in just the right position in memory. And now I have to go over here, and I have to press C up, Z and R all at the same time, to do this kind of glitch where I'm sort of in C up and I'm sort of not. The camera's now locked in place right now, or locked in a specific direction. And I have certain properties of being in C up, but also still being able to move around. And I want to do this to get up to the crawl space up here. And this will let me have free camera movement after I do a glitch in the crawl space. So I want to crawl in and out of the crawl space and read the sign really quickly. And that'll allow me to use a deku nut, and the deku nut will allow me to have free movement while I'm still sort of reading the sign. And if I didn't do that C up thing, I would actually have a locked camera right now, and I want this free camera because when I pick up this rock here, the glitch is going to deactivate and the camera's going to go back to the crawl space. And I'm going to be able to pick up the rock just as the camera moves away. And now the rock is culled. That means it's too far away from the camera to be fully loaded. And that'll disable certain properties of it, like typically when I leave the area the rock would despawn completely. In this case it won't, and Link will still be holding something, but it won't be the rock anymore. It'll be something that loads in its place. In this case, it's actually going to load in the place of a piece of grass, but not the position or angle of the grass, but instead it's going to be manipulating what's known as a function pointer. So now when I'm walking around and changing my angle, it's changing this function pointer. And so I'm going to do some spins here to get an exact angle I need for changing this function pointer. And now it'll do this. And so what a function pointer is it's something that tells the game to look in some other area in the code for instructions. And so the manipulated function pointer points to the file name, and the file name points to a function that loads the debug file. And this debug file happens to have almost all the items in the game, so now I have almost everything. Okay, so here in Deku Tree with all these items, I'm just going to set Furora's Wind. So Furora's Wind just has to be set for this upcoming part, period. It doesn't matter where Furora's Wind is set, Deku Tree is just the fastest place to set it. And so now I'm going to go to Lost Woods. I'm doing this Hess where you roll into a bomb and hold slightly outside the dead zone with the control stick to go really fast. Pretty fast moving option. I messed it up here, but I just need to get over to this ledge over here. So first thing I need to do coming up is actually get a few extra resources. So even though this gave me almost everything, I actually need a few items in bottles. So there's this grotto over here you can conveniently open with Song of Storms, and in here I need to get a fairy, bugs, and a fish. And the bugs and fish are going to be for more SRM stuff coming up soon, and the fairy is going to be for a different glitch later. For the fairy I can just play a song here. You can play any of the Grey Note songs except for Song of Storms to get this fairy, but Sun Song is actually the fastest. And when I catch this fairy, I actually dupe it over a red potion bottle by pressing the red potion while I'm crouched, so that it updates as my last button pressed. And so then when the bottle swings, it actually goes over your last button pressed, which in that case was red potion. I did the same thing with the B button there, where I used the explosion on the grass to press B and have my sword getting pulled be interrupted by the explosion hitting my shield, which put a bottle on B, and the bottle on B is going to be important later on. So now I have fish, fairy, and bugs, and I have resources set up for more SRM. So Lost Woods is a really good place for SRM. The reason we did it in Kukuri Forest before is just Kukuri Forest is the easiest place to do it when you have almost no items. With more items, Lost Woods is the much more convenient place to do it. And it's going to be done off grass this time, specifically a super slide off this piece of grass right here. So when I do the super slide off the grass, the game is keeping that reference to the grass, and it's being modified by Link's angle, and something else is going to be loaded in its place when I go back in that room. And what's going to be changed is actually Link's age. This SRM right now is actually changing Link's age, and it changes the age value of Link to 0, which is actually adult. And you saw when I paused there, it showed adult Link on the screen, and it had adult equipment and stuff. And so that actually let me equip Mirror Shield as child. And well, I actually equipped it as adult, but when you leave the area, you become child again. You actually can stay adult if you save and reset, then you actually keep the adult state, and you're just adult without normally grabbing the Master Sword. But for the purposes of this run, child is actually better because of this next upcoming SRM. So this second SRM that I'm doing right now is going to mess with Furora's Wind. That Furora's Wind I set, when this is done, it will no longer be set in Deku Tree. This is actually going to glitch Furora's Wind and set it to a glitched entrance value. So this glitched entrance value won't actually correspond to any particular entrance. It'll actually make it so that whenever I use Furora's Wind, it takes you to an entrance based on Link's angle. And for these SRM setups, this requires extremely precise angles. You need one specific angle to work and anything else will crash. But luckily this game has mechanics we can make use of to get these really precise angles consistently. And so this invisible piece of grass right here, this is modifying the Furora's Wind entrance value. And so right now it's now a glitched value. And now whenever I warp back to that Furora's Wind, it's going to take me to somewhere based on Link's angle. And the important thing about it is that 1, it only works at night, which is actually why I play Sunsong here. And 2, it also only works as child. That's actually why I didn't want to stay adult after doing that adult SRM, is because for some reason this just only works as child, it just won't work as adult. So now here's the third SRM. This is actually to delete medallions. So I mentioned earlier how the definition of all dungeons requires actually receiving the medallion or stone from the blue orbs at the end of dungeons. Shadow and Spirit Medallion have a weird thing where they don't actually set any flags. They just check your inventory if you have the medallion, yes or no. And if the answer is yes, then it doesn't do anything. It doesn't give you a medallion or play a cutscene or anything. And so it was kind of a weird point of contention, but the community debated whether or not it counted as completing a dungeon if the game wouldn't actually give you the medallion if you already had it. And so there's a long community debate, and we decided that the game does actually have to give you the medallions. And so, because this debug file actually has all the medallions, we have to do that SRM to delete it. That invisible piece of grass that I picked up while changing my angle there was actually modifying everything on the quest status screen. It changes everything on quest status, not just medallions, but deleting medallions was the important part there. And now for the fourth and final SRM. This one's going to be similar to the first one that changed Link's age. But it's not going to actually change Link's age, it's just going to run certain code that updates Link's equipment. Because normally when you go back and forward in time, the game has to check your buttons to see what you have equipped, what needs to be updated when you go back and forward in time. And that's what the Bottle and B is for. So there's this glitch called Bottle Adventure, where if you have a Bottle and B as adult, and you go back and forward in time, you will have a different item on B when you go forward in time again, based on the C-Right item, the item you have on C-Right as child. It'll check that C-Right item, and whatever value that points to, it'll put that value on B as adult. And so the last time I was adult, during that SRM, I had a bottle on B, which means the next time I'm supposed to become adult, it'll update my B button with something else. So this SRM will sort of become adult, but only enough to make the equip updates happen. So I get my angle here, and go through this loading zone to prepare for the SRM, and go down to 13 Decanuts, and then I equip a fish on C right. So fish on C right points to my Decanut count, and my Decanut count is 13, which means when my B button updates, I will have the item value 13 on B, and item value 13 is Furor's Wind. So now when I warp away here, the SRM will activate, and I'll have Furor's Wind on B. And with Furor's Wind on B, I can now use Furor's Wind anywhere I want, even outside dungeons. And with the glitched Furor's Wind entrance value, I can just get an angle I want and warp away. And in this case, I warp right into Bottom of the Well, and right into this Skulltula. The Bottom of the Well isn't a dungeon you need to beat for all dungeons, but the reason I want to go here is because it has an easily accessible wall master which I can use for the next warp. So now this warp glitch is active, and it's not just a single warp, it's actually a chainable warp, because when you warp into the area with that glitched Furor's Wind entrance, it keeps your last entrance glitched. And that means anything that will try to take you back to a certain entrance based on your last entrance will also be glitched. This includes using Furor's Wind, obviously, voiding out, dying, or getting grabbed by a wall master, which I just did right there. So wall masters and dying do a little bit different things than voiding and Furor's Wind. So voiding and Furor's Wind will use the specific coordinates of your respawn point and the specific room number. And dying and Wallmaster will not use room number or coordinates, they will just set you at a very specific entrance, and whatever room number happens to be loaded at that entrance will be loaded. So there are certain places that we warp to where just warping to the coordinates is better, and certain places where having a certain entrance is better. And Twinrova is one that specific entrance is better. Twinrova, the battle for Twinrova is actually done in room 3, and that room in Bottom of the Well was actually room 0. And it's also important to note that Furor's Wind, when I initially set Furor's Wind back in Deku Tree, that was also room 0. So right now, anything I warp to with Furor's Wind is going to be loaded room 0. Room 0 in boss rooms is actually pretty bad. Typically, room 0 is actually the room before the boss room, or like it's like a copy of the room before the boss room from inside the dungeon. And most boss fights take place in room 1. Twinrova is actually an exception, where Twinrova actually takes place in room 3. And that's actually kind of bad for warping. It's kind of awkward to warp to Twinrova with room 3. It actually is possible, but for the purposes of this run, it's a bit awkward to do quickly. And so a Wallmaster is the best choice for warping in here, because a Wallmaster puts you at a specific entrance, and there happens to be an entrance directly into this room. And so also during this fight, you saw earlier I took some damage that actually was intentional. I will be needing to die a bit later, and so I do want to take damage on Twinrova. And it's also something to note about Twinrova. Twinrova's child is like this thing that we always wish was possible for a long time. Like, it's never actually been possible until recently, because we can never equip Mirror Shield as child, and we finally can with this SRM. Although unfortunately it does still technically require becoming adult, so for something like max % child doesn't really count. Also, this Mirror Shield looks really cool. It's invisible as child, but you can actually see it when reflecting this beam. It's really cool. Oh, I should also talk about equipping the hammer. So the hammer is another item that normally can't be equipped as child. That actually wasn't part of SRM. I equipped the hammer with equip swap. So what equip swap is when you hover over an item on the item menu and you switch screens and you go back to the item menu, if on the first possible frame you press up or down, left or right, depending on what side of the screen you're on, and a C button, you will equip that item. You'll equip the item you're hovering over over the item slot that the cursor first moves to. In that case, it actually equipped the hammer over the Din's Fire slot. You'll notice the next time I pause, it'll look like I have Din's Fire equipped when it's really the hammer. And so that's a cool way to equip the hammer as child. And so, after beating Spirit Temple here, I don't want to just go straight in the blue warp. One, that'll cancel the glitch. The glitch will cancel anytime you leave an area normally without one of the 4 methods I mentioned earlier. And 2, I also want to skip the cutscene, not only because it's faster, but it also crashes as child. So, using Furo's Wind on B allows me to use Furo's Wind in the boss room. So I can step on the blue warp and teleport away, and again I have to have a very specific angle when I warp away. And I can warp away right as the cutscene starts. It gives me the medallion. I have another angle set specifically for Bottom of the Well, and it warps me back to Bottom of the Well. I can also get some magic there. This run is very heavy on magic use, as you can imagine when this whole glitch revolves around Furo's Wind. So now is the next angle setup for the next boss. The next boss is going to be Phantom Ganon. So I just spin around a little bit and find a good angle for Phantom Ganon. And now I get warped straight there. And so Phantom Ganon is another boss that's kind of inconvenient for warping in with Furo's Wind. So generally, if you have a choice of warping in with Furo's Wind or warping in with a Wallmaster, Furo's Wind is usually the faster option. Wallmaster is kind of the option you use if for some reason Furo's Wind is bad. I mentioned for Twinrova it's bad because of the Room 3 issue. For Phantom Ganon it's bad because Phantom Ganon's coordinates are for some reason really far away from what typical like starting room coordinates are. It's like way off in the distance for some reason. And so just warping in with the coordinates from somewhere else is just not good. And so a Wallmaster is preferred. So for Phantom Ganon, Slingshot works, you don't need the bow. Even Hookshot also works as adult. So I can just Slingshot Phantom Ganon here. And the Boomerang is also really cool. So normally after this phase in the fight where he comes out of the painting, if you try to shoot him with a projectile, he spins his staff, and that makes him vulnerable. And normally you can actually attack him during that to try to knock him down. The Boomerang both hits him and makes him spin his staff. So the Boomerang is like an auto stone, it just automatically brings him down and makes that fight really quick, especially with ISG. And he's already dead. So once again, I have to do another warp setup before going back to Bottom of the Well. One thing I should note about these warp setups is, I mentioned they're specific to Link's angle. They are angle perfect. There are 65,000 plus total possible angles, and these setups are specific to one specific angle. And that makes it kind of scary to do these angle setups, because like if you mess up at all, then you will either warp to a completely different place or you will crash, and there's a very high chance that if you mess it up that you'll crash. But luckily we can make setups to go wherever we want. When I'm doing these things like the side rolls and the ESS turning and all these weird movements during these setups, these all change Link's angle by an exact amount, and so we can combine these movement options to always get any exact angle we need. And so one more Wallmaster and this will go to Baronade. This will actually be the last Wallmaster of the run. The rest of the warps will be using Furo's Wind. So Baronade in particular is not actually hard to wrong warp into with Furo's Wind. The important part of this last one with a Wallmaster is actually setting room 1. So I mentioned earlier how most boss rooms are actually in room 1 and not room 0. And the room I was in Bottom of the Well was room 0. If I just set Furo's Wind there, I can't really warp directly into the boss fights. So by warping into Baronade with room 1, and then setting Furo's Wind right here, this will set my coordinates right there where I started in Baronade's room, and it will set the room number as room 1. That means for all the rest of the bosses that I warp to, I will warp directly into the fight room. Then the Baronade fight is mostly pretty straightforward. I want to take damage here, both because I want to die soon, and also it makes Baronade come up faster. And that's the end of the fight. So, this next part coming up is kind of weird. So, I can't just step in the blue warp and then warp away because Rudo is there, and Rudo kind of messes things up. But there's a few glitches you can do to make this work out properly. So first I'm going to use Din's Fire on the blue warp. And after a certain amount of time, when you're in the blue warp, Rudo will kind of make you turn towards her. And if you do that with Din's Fire active, you can actually prevent her text coming up, and you can kind of move around while in the blue warp, and you kind of get warped back every time you move. And while doing this, I can die and get revived by the fairy, and now I'm moving around with the text up. And with that, I can actually use Furo's Wind. Otherwise, I couldn't use Furo's Wind here. So I can warp away right as the cutscene's starting. And now I warp actually into Deku Tree. So a weird thing about that warp, that actually did not care about my angle at all, because Jabu was a dungeon that would typically start a wrong warp. And interestingly enough, doing a warp away from one of the dungeons that would typically wrong warp you with this glitch active actually do not cause wrong warps. Instead, they will always send you to Deku Tree. They will always send you to Scene 0, which is Deku Tree. And you also notice that there was nothing loaded there. That's because Deku Tree Room 1 was loaded. If you actually looked around, you could see Deku Tree Room 1. And then immediately after that, I warped away and found myself in the Morpha fight. And that's just, you can do a very quick setup from one of the walls in Deku Tree to an angle that corresponds to Morpha's room. So I can just very easily use Furo's Wind and warp straight to Morpha. So the Morpha fight is pretty interesting, because normally you have to use Hookshot for this to get Morpha out of the water. And trying to use Hookshot as Child will actually softlock you. So Hookshot is not a viable option here. Luckily there is a strat where you can actually hit Morpha from the side of this middle platform, and you can just barely reach the ball and do some damage very quickly and beat the boss that quickly. So that's actually a lot harder than it looks. That's actually the Morpha quick kill. Fights as Child are usually much longer than that. That's both hard and luck based. You can only get that kill if Morpha appears on one of the sides of the platform and not the corners. Morpha can appear on any of the 4 sides and 4 corners, so essentially it's a 50-50 chance whether you can go for it at all. And then you have to be right on the edge, and sometimes you'll miss it, and sometimes Morpha will start making a tentacle too quickly, and then you can't really do it. The other method for that, if you don't get that quick kill, is just kind of manipulating the tentacle to form and then keep climbing the pillar and then jump slashing in the water while the molecule kind of bounces around. But either way, that's pretty much the best fight you can get. Then I just do another setup here, another angle setup. This angle setup will take me directly into Goma's room in Deku Tree. So I just fall straight in. And again, those coordinates are based on where I set Furo's Wind in Baronade's room. That's why I'm kind of like off to the side a little bit. That's just where those coordinates correspond. And so I actually drank blue potion there. So this is a very rare case where a speedrun actually needs blue potion. That's actually for refilling magic, because this run uses so much magic that blue potion, drinking some potion is actually required. So then I can start the Goma fight. And the Goma fight's really quick. Just Dekina, do a few crouch stabs. Hammer jump slash power crouch stab is 4 damage, and Goma has 10 health, so 3 hits easily kills her. So this next blue warp coming up, this is just like the Jabu one, where my angle doesn't actually matter. It'll always take me to Scene 0, which is Deku Tree, no matter what. So I can actually just run in here as quickly as possible and use Furo's Wind. And this will take me back to Deku Tree. And you can see room 1 over there. So now I have to do another quick setup. This is going to be for Dodongo's Cavern. And I warp over here, and I warp into King Dodongo's room, except very far out of bounds. King Dodongo's room is a lucky one where its coordinates are like really far away from typical starting coordinates, but the fight checks for your height. And so if you're super far out of bounds, as long as you're falling, like eventually you'll fall past the line where it says, okay, start the fight, and you'll get teleported right into the fight. So coordinates essentially don't matter for warping in here. And I just ran out of bombs, but that's okay because there are bomb flowers here. And the debug file actually gives me Goron bracelet. So you can actually pick up these bomb flowers. So this run is actually kind of bomb perfect. There's actually like one bomb that technically you can skip, but it's essentially bomb perfect. But you have that spare bomb flower there anyway, so it doesn't really matter. And that's the last bomb needed for the run anyway. So Dodongo's Cavern is another one where it would typically cause a wrong warp. That means that I don't have to worry about my angle. It'll always go to Decatry. So just step in here, warp away at the right time. Back to Decatry. And this will be the last boss warp. And this is for Bongo Bongo. I'm gonna quickly do some equips here. And Bongo Bongo, just like King Dodongo, is another fight where when you warp in, no matter what your coordinates are, you'll always warp directly into the fight, as long as you fall a certain distance. In this case, it actually is a little bit bad, because typically for this fight, you actually want to do a jump slash before the fight to set your power crouch stab, and I'm actually not able to do that because of how quickly the fight starts. So I actually have to do an extra jump slash as soon as the fight starts, which kind of makes things a bit awkward. Like this. But after that, it's just get ISG, slingshot the hands, quickly shoot the eye, and then ISG to death. And so I mentioned this is the last boss warp, even though I still have one boss to do, which is Volvagia. So there's nothing wrong with warping into Volvagia, but the issue is that after beating all the bosses, I need to get to the credits. And there's two ways to do that. I could either go beat Ganon, which actually is not required for this category, or I can just wrong warp into the credits, which is allowed. And wrong warping into the credits is obviously faster. And one of the dungeons that causes a wrong warp, those being Decatry, Dodongo's Cavern, Jabu, and Fire Temple, one of those is typically the fastest way to get to the credits. And it turns out for this route that Fire Temple is actually the best to get to the credits. But again, I mentioned that wrong warping doesn't really work with this warping glitch active, which is kind of weird. But essentially that means I can't just warp to Fire Temple and then warp to the credits. I have to go to Fire Temple normally. So, when I warp away here, I'm actually not warping to Fire Temple. I'm warping to Gerudo Fortress. And Gerudo Fortress is important because this is a place where I can set Furora's Wind in order to warp to the credits from Fire Temple. I just have to enter and exit this room here, and put Furora's Wind at this entrance. And then over at Fire Temple, when I warp away with Furora's Wind, the cutscene that the game tries to set in Fire Temple, plus warping back to this entrance value with Furora's Wind, will cause the game to actually jump to the credits in Lon Lon. So now I go to the final dungeon normally. So the reason Fire Temple is chosen is it's just the fastest dungeon to get to the boss. So, or the fastest to get to the boss from a warp song. So Dodongo's Cavern, Deku Tree, those just take a little bit longer to get to the boss. Fire Temple is just the fastest to get directly from a warp song to the boss there. So to get into Fire Temple, you actually have to hover behind those rocks. So those rocks actually do not break with hammer. Those are silver rocks that you pick up with silver gauntlets, not hammer rocks. That's why I have to hover around them. And then here I can get into Fire Temple. So interestingly, when you enter Fire Temple as child, Darunia is not here. Normally when you enter this room, Darunia talks to you about the Gorons and stuff. He's just not here as child. It doesn't have to do with a debug file or anything. He's just not there. Something to mention about the debug file though is I have 8 small keys and the boss key, so I can just walk straight into the boss door. And that's why it's so quick to get over here, why it's so quick to get to Volvagia. And so for the Volvagia fight here, Volvagia actually has 2 hitboxes. One for the one that goes flying around and one for the one that pops out of the ground. And the one that goes flying actually stays under that hole it just flew into during the cutscene. And I can actually hit it using bomb chews and using Deku Nuts to blow up the bomb chews quickly. And you can actually hear Volvagia's like hit sound effect. Those bomb chews were continually hitting Volvagia for very quick damage. So then I just stun Volvagia once, do a jump slash, and Volvagia's already dead. And now here for the final part, all I gotta do is step in the blue warp and use Furo's Wind, and as soon as the blue warp loads, I'll start being taken away. And with Furo's Wind set in Gerudo Fortress, when I try to warp away here, it'll try to play a cutscene in the wrong place, which will set a certain offset that puts the game at a different map, at a different entrance, and actually ends up loading the credits in Lon Lon Ranch. And that's the end of the run. So yeah, that's a pretty fast all dungeons run. This run is obviously super broken now. So a lot of people worked on making this route possible. So big shoutouts to Blinny, Natalia Has Died, Mr. Cheese, and Save State, who helped a lot with figuring out the route for this and making things work out, finding the glitches in the first place. And yeah, they had a huge part in just making this all work and making all dungeons the ridiculously broken category it is now. So I do want to mention again, I mentioned this earlier, but if you do think this is like too broken of a run, there is a no SRM version of all dungeons that completely bans SRM, and for all categories that allow SRM, there are separate categories that also ban it, because obviously SRM is like ridiculously broken. Like the stuff in this run is crazy broken, and so it is reasonable to think that, you know, it might be too broken for speedruns in some cases, and that is why there's separate categories. So it's not like SRM, you know, completely takes over the game, because we do have separate categories for no SRM. But yeah, that's pretty much it for this run. Hope you guys enjoyed it. I think this run is super cool. Even if you don't see a whole lot of the game, but I just think the things that go into this run are like super cool and fascinating, and I hope you guys enjoy it too. So thanks for watching.